When you are living outdoors in extreme climates, your shelter is your number one important thing. And it's important to remember that your clothing is your first and primary shelter. So let's talk about the outerwear that I brought with me for Alone Frozen. That was a huge key to my success out there and becoming the first woman to win a solitary survival challenge on Alone. Alone Frozen was my second Alone adventure, and I definitely learned a ton from the gear that I brought on Alone Season 6 about both what worked fabulous and what was not so hot in that situation. Also, it was a really different climate in Labrador. It was on the coast, so it was a lot wetter, and I knew that we were going to be having a longer period of wet cold versus dry cold. Now, dry cold is a way easier condition to deal with than wet cold. The challenge on Alone is that you are always launched early enough that you are going to be straddling the wet cold into dry cold transition. Now, we thought with our very late drop in Labrador, mid-October, which is pretty darn late in that far northern climate, we thought that we would be experiencing mostly dry cold conditions. That actually ended up not being the case because it was kind of a different year. And we had a lot of warmer temperatures later than expected and a lot of very rapid transitions between the warm and dry temperatures. So you'd be in the dry cold and then all of a sudden back to wet cold and back and forth more times than I could count. Just as I did with my clothing for Alone Season 6, I did put a lot of time into hand making a lot of my clothing for Alone Frozen. But knowing that we were going to be on the coast with a different climate, I actually chose to take more manufactured gear and a few departures from my all natural materials like I tried to stick with for Alone Season 6. Let's walk you through those choices. I knew that initially the temperatures were going to be too warm for something like a heavy fur and buckskin parka. So I had to think about what pants and shirt were going to be ideal for me during that warmer but wetter season. On Alone, you get to bring essentially two jackets, a parka and then another wool shirt, which can be a thicker wool shirt so that it can serve as outerwear, and two pairs of pants. So what I wanted to do was to choose that gear that would give me the best advantage early in the season and last in the season. What that ended up looking like for me was different sets of pants for the two different climate conditions. After Alone Season 6, I put out a series of videos about my 10 items choices and other things related to my Season 6 experience. I have been back from Alone Frozen for over a year and a half now, and I have yet to do that because I was too dang busy writing this, my friends, my book, Never Alone, about my time on Alone Season 6. If you are interested in this video, you are going to be very interested in everything this book shares. It has my prep, my gear choices, my recovery, and the amazing journey in between. You can order online or from any local retailer. You can look at my website, WoniyaThibeault.com, for information that you can give your local bookstores so that they can easily order it for you and keep it in stock. Please check it out. Let's start with my pants choices. Because you have to be planning for two very distinct phases of weather when you're going into Alone and you get two of many items, it's important to think about something that would be good for the wet cold season and something that will be good for the dry cold season. In my case, because Frozen took place on the coast of Labrador rather than inland, I also had to be thinking about things that would be okay for potentially being in the ocean or very near seawater and things that were not going to be going in the sea. That is why for my pants, I made a choice that was a departure from all of the clothing choices I made for the Alone Season 6 series, in which besides my rain gear, I brought all clothing of natural materials like wool, fur, and leather. So the pants that I brought for the early phase and ocean phase of Alone Frozen were synthetic. They are the Sitka pants. I don't actually remember the model, but I'm sure you can look them up. But I got them for a couple of reasons. One, because I knew that synthetics were something that I would be willing to walk into the ocean in or potentially get doused in seawater in. And then also, I loved the fact that they had integrated knee pads, and I knew that these were going to be really key for me during the shelter building phase. And were they ever? Because my building was so challenging. My spot was so incredibly rugged on frozen that I spent a lot of time digging out my shelter to make it somewhat semi-terranean. And then also I was building with dirt and rocks a lot. So having these knee pads to be kneeling in that wet soil and hauling big rocks around all day was really important. Also, definitely key for going in the water. I did have to wade in after mussels and seawater a fair amount. I tried to stay dry, but I did occasionally get drenched, and I was really glad that it was in synthetic pants. They were easy to rinse out and dry rather than my nice wool or buckskin pants. I brought buckskin pants to the Arctic, and it was a really hard choice to leave behind buckskin pants in Labrador, but given the wetter climate and the coast, that is the choice that I made, and I think it really served me well. Synthetics have some major liabilities in addition to a few advantages. Nowhere near as warm, so I did not wear these pants as soon as the temperatures really dropped or if I wasn't at the coast. That means these didn't get that much wear beyond the first couple weeks where I was very focused on shelter building. Even though I was only wearing them for a little bit of the time, however, they took a freaking beating. Partly just getting torn up and pitchy, but also very much by the fire. So being around my fire at night and drying them, I got a lot of sparks fly out of the fire. Sometimes I noticed them right away and could get them off of me. Sometimes I didn't. So as you will see, I got a lot of fairly significant holes in these pants. One there, one up towards the crotch there. Lots of pitch and wear on these suckers. Even with them being nowhere near as warm, and even with the holes I got on them, I would say that these served me really well for those initial building periods of my time, and the really durable material on the knees and butt were really huge. I would not have wanted to put my wool pants, amazing as they are, through the grinding abrasion rigors of building like I did with these pants. All in all, I didn't wear them nearly as much as the other pants, but they served me well and I was really glad to have them. The Sitka synthetic pants with the built-in knee pads and reinforced butt and knees, definitely a good way to go for me out there. Earlier in the season, my primary outerwear on top was this wool shirt, which I put a lot of time and energy into making and was an amazing garment for me out there. I did a process of leaf printing and dyeing all of the pieces separate to make my own version of camouflage and to take some little impressions of wild plants that I know and love for my home environment out with me. So it's hard to see now, it faded because it just got so much wear out in Labrador, but you can maybe see some of the very faint impressions of the leaves with which I printed this to make my camo. I bought upholstery fabric, so it was 100% wool upholstery fabric from the Pendleton factory that I bought in a bolt. And I washed it in really hot water and put it through the dryer 3 times, which made it much, much tighter and made it felted. Now, this was to make it really, really durable and as waterproof as I could get it. So as that wool shrunk, it tightened the weave structure to make it windproof and water resistant, which was very much what I was after, and it absolutely was, and it did really, really well for me out there. This thing was just bomber. Here's some more detail on my wool shirt. Nicely fitted hood, 2 nice pockets. I did a little embroidery, put a little leaf on one pocket. Brass buttons that could have been used for lures for fishing, had there been any fish, which there weren't. Here's a leaf print. This is an English walnut leaf. This style of sleeve allows for a little bit more maneuverability. So this is designed to be more of a working shirt. So it gave me a lot of ability to work really hard in it. And then it's fitted so that the cold winter winds in Labrador had a harder time getting up into my garments. Very generous fitted hood with elastic and the ability to cinch that hood up tight around me, and buttons all the way up to the chin to help keep my warm air in and the cold wear out. I say water resistant, not waterproof, because I really pushed this sucker to its limits. What happened when I arrived in Labrador was I recognized that the environment was absolutely different than what I'd been expecting and preparing for. It was such a harsh climate that most of the trees were what we call crumholts, where the wind is so intense that a lot of trees can't handle growing upright, so they grow more out. So there were all of these very, very low spruce forests that were just tangles of branches and needles and small trees, total ankle breakers, really hard to get through, and absolutely terrible on your clothes because all of those branches are grabbing and tearing at your clothes. So during my initial building, I was doing a lot of hauling materials. That meant that I was wading through these thickets of really, really dense, low trees. And I was really afraid, and I think it was a correct fear, that my rain gear, had I been wearing it, would have been torn to shreds. My rain gear was not up to snuff, particularly my pants. I just brought a standard pair of backpacking rain pants. These ones are an REI brand. They're okay for backpacking, camping, light work, but the kind of heavy duty building and bushwhacking and brush dragging I was doing, I think I was right that they would have been torn to shreds and then no good to me for the rest of my time out. So what I choose to do instead was wear just my synthetic pants with my homemade gaiters, which were extra large because none of the gaiters that I could find at a store were big enough to go over my enormous handmade boots for northern winters. So I put these around these pants to act kind of like knee pads and some amount of rain protection for wading through all of that brush. On top, I chose to just not wear a rain jacket. And even though as of day 3, we got a terrible storm that didn't let up for days and days, I decided just to wear this, stay as dry as I could, and assume that that was going to keep me warm and dry enough and save my rain jacket for later in the season when I wouldn't be putting it through the ringer in the same way and when I was really going to need it. Now, I think that choice worked for me because my rain gear stayed intact. But while this was extremely water resistant, after about 3 days of absurd weather, pounding winds that were just driving the pounding rain and incredible moisture right through me, this did end up getting soaked, but it took 3 days for that water to soak through. Once it did, I was absolutely drenched, and I was pretty much hypothermic for a lot of my early days out on Alone Frozen, which, if you've seen the season, is why I had a bit of a breakdown. Day 6, that was absolutely my low point. I'd been hypothermic for so long. I had extreme tendonitis in both hands from prying muscles off the rocks with cold hands and from hauling heavy rocks and digging in the soil all day to build my shelter. Hypothermic, limited use of my hands with a huge amount of pain in them. And then I also had a pretty intense wound on my toe, which I didn't understand at the time, but now I do. It's basically like a cold sore on your nail bed. It was really intense, incredibly painful, and had me limping. So only one good foot, no good hands, and hypothermic for days. That's why I had a breakdown day 6. However, as soon as the sucker dried out, it was back to amazing again, and the combination of this with my rain jacket was awesome. I was so much warmer, even in more challenging conditions in Labrador than I was in the Northwest Territories for Alone season 6.